The bubbles from the dish soap clung to my weathered hands. I scrubbed Margaret's favorite coffee mug for what felt like the 100th time this month, even though I'd only used it this morning. It was a foolish habit, but it was mine. It was the same routine every evening. I'd wash the single plate, the single fork, the single cup that served as the silent monument to another solitary dinner. Each clink of ceramic against the rack echoed in the cavernous silence of a kitchen that was once filled with life. It used to be filled with Margaret's off-key humming and her gentle scolding about the newspapers I left scattered across the table. I dried the mug with the careful precision of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. I placed it in its designated spot on the dish rack, a shrine to better times. The refrigerator hummed its lonely tune behind me, its door a chaotic mosaic of faded photos and mismatched magnets. A picture of Rick at his high school graduation always caught my eye. He was 17, grinning from ear to ear in his cap and gown, with Margaret's arm wrapped proudly around his shoulders. That was before the argument started, before money became a weapon, before the silence became a wall between us. The shrill, piercing ring of the wall-mounted phone cut through my thoughts like a surgeon's scalpel. My wet hands fumbled for the dish towel. The phone continued its insistent, demanding shriek. I grabbed the cold receiver, the plastic unfamiliar in my palm after so long. Squinting through my reading glasses, I peered at the caller ID. The name made my breath catch in my throat. Rick. For a full second, I couldn't move, couldn't think. A year of unspoken words stretched between us, a vast and desolate ocean. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The last time we had spoken, it ended with him storming out of this very kitchen. He'd demanded money for some can't-miss investment opportunity, and I'd refused. Margaret would have handled it better. She always knew the right words to say, the right tone to use. I cleared my throat, my own voice a stranger to my ears. "Hello," I said. The word came out like gravel. "Dad?" Rick's voice was hesitant, uncertain. It was the same tone he used as a boy when he'd broken a vase and was trying to gauge how much trouble he was in. It's me." My knuckles were white as I gripped the phone. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Rick, I wasn't expecting—" "I know," he cut in quickly. "I know it's been—" He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath on the other end of the line. "Too long. Way too long." I moved slowly toward my armchair, the one Margaret had insisted we buy because it supported my back just right. The leather was worn smooth from years of evening news broadcasts and Sunday crosswords. "How are you, son?" "I'm good. I'm really good," he said, the words slightly too fast. "Emma and we've been talking. We realized how much we miss having you around. How much we miss family." The word hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. Family. It was something we had been once, but pride and money and a stubborn masculine silence had built walls so high, I thought they'd never come down. "I miss it too," I admitted, surprised by the raw honesty in my own voice. "Dad, would you consider coming for dinner tonight?" he asked. The question rushed. "Emma's making that pot roast you always loved. We could talk. Really talk. Like we used to." I stared at the family photo on the side table. Rick, Emma, Margaret, and me at their wedding 5 years ago, before everything went so wrong. Margaret always said families find their way back to each other, given enough time. Tonight? My voice betrayed my surprise. "I know it's short notice," he said quickly. But Emma's already started cooking and we don't want to wait anymore. We've wasted enough time. Something in his voice tugged at a memory deep inside me. A vulnerability I hadn't heard in years, not since he was a small boy, afraid of thunderstorms and hiding under the blankets. Maybe Margaret had been right all along. Maybe families really could heal. "What time?" I heard myself say. 7:30. I'll text you the address. We moved to Montclair last year. Montclair. That was expensive territory. Rick had always been ambitious. "I'll be there." "Dad," his voice softened, filled with a relief that sounded genuine. "Thank you. Thank you for giving us another chance." After I hung up, I sat in the gathering dusk, the family photo trembling in my hands. Margaret smiled up at me from the frame, and for a moment, I could almost hear her whisper, "It's time, Jonathan. It's time to come home." The silence that followed the call felt different, charged with a fragile possibility instead of the usual crushing emptiness. I set the photo carefully back on the table and rose from my chair with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I was going to get my son back. Upstairs, my bedroom felt like a museum of memories. Margaret's perfume bottles still lined her dresser, dust motes dancing in the late afternoon light that streamed through the lace curtains. I opened my closet and pushed past the everyday shirts and worn sweaters until my fingers found the navy suit hanging in a protective plastic bag. The wool blend felt substantial between my fingers. Margaret had insisted on it when she surprised me with it for Rick's graduation. "You need something nice for important occasions," she'd said, smoothing the lapels with her careful hands. "And our son graduating is definitely important." I carried the suit to the bed and unwrapped it slowly. I remembered the fierce pride I'd felt walking into that auditorium, Margaret on my arm, watching Rick cross the stage to accept his diploma. That same suit had seen me through anniversaries, job interviews, and eventually, Margaret's funeral. Tonight, it would witness another milestone, a resurrection. The shower's hot water loosened muscles I didn't even realize had been tensed for a year. As I shaved, I studied my reflection. When had I gotten so old? The lines around my eyes had deepened into canyons, and silver now dominated the hair at my temples. Would Rick see the toll his absence had taken? Would Emma see how lonely I'd become? Dressed and ready, I selected a bottle of aged whiskey from the cabinet, a peace offering. Just as I was about to head downstairs, my phone buzzed with Rick's text. 247 Elmwood Drive, Montclair. "Can't wait to see you, Dad." I called for an Uber, my fingers hesitating for a moment as I typed in the address. Montclair was a world away from my modest Brooklyn neighborhood. Standing by my front window, I watched the familiar brownstones blur into the evening shadows. Mrs. Chen from next door waved from her stoop, and I waved back, feeling a lightness in my chest I hadn't experienced in months. Maybe tonight would change everything. The Uber arrived precisely on time, a clean sedan with a driver who offered a friendly comment on the nice weather. As we pulled away from the curb, I watched my world transform outside the window. Brooklyn's familiar, gritty landscape gave way to highways, which in turn bled into manicured suburbs. The houses grew larger, their lawns more pristine. By the time we crossed into New Jersey, I was staring at mansions that could have housed 6 families like mine. These weren't homes. They were statements. "Montclair's a beautiful area," the driver remarked, noticing my wide-eyed stare. "Lot of successful folks out here." "I'm visiting my son," I replied, a swell of pride in my chest. It felt good to say it out loud. He and his wife just moved out here. Lucky man, having family in a place like this, he said. Lucky indeed, I thought, though a sliver of unease began to creep into my excitement. How had Rick managed this? The last I knew, his investment opportunities were bleeding him dry. A year ago, he couldn't make rent. Now he lived in one of New Jersey's most expensive zip codes? The Uber slowed to a stop in front of a house that looked like it had been ripped from the pages of an architectural magazine. I sat frozen in the back seat, staring at stone columns and perfectly sculpted topiaries that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. A circular driveway curved around an ornate fountain, its waters dancing in the early evening light. 2 luxury cars, a Mercedes and a BMW, were parked like gleaming trophies of success. "This is it, sir," the driver announced cheerfully. "Beautiful place." I fumbled with my wallet, my hands trembling slightly as I paid him, adding a generous tip. The car door felt heavy as I stepped onto the pristine pavement. My shoes, polished but obviously worn, clicked against the stone path leading to an entrance that could have belonged to a small hotel. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined the walkway, and motion sensor lights illuminated my approach with theatrical precision. Before my hand could even reach for the brass doorbell, the massive oak door swung open. A middle-aged Hispanic woman with kind eyes stood in the doorway, wearing a crisp black dress that identified her as professional staff. Her smile seemed genuine, but I saw something flicker in her eyes for a split second. It looked like concern, or maybe a warning. It vanished so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. "Mr. Miller," she said warmly, stepping aside to usher me in. "I'm Maria. Mr. Rick and Miss Emma are so excited you're here." The foyer was breathtaking. Marble floors stretched toward a grand, curved staircase that belonged in a movie. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on what looked like original oil paintings. The air was filled with the subtle perfume of fresh flowers. "Dad!" Rick's voice boomed from deeper within the house. He appeared in the foyer, looking less like my son and more like a model from a men's fashion magazine. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, teeth that were definitely whiter than they'd been at his graduation. He reached me and pulled me into an embrace that felt desperate, lasting a beat too long. "You look great," he said, stepping back to study me with eyes that seemed both grateful and anxious. "Really great?" Emma materialized beside him like a graceful apparition in a silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her makeup was flawless, her jewelry subtle but clearly expensive. "Jonathan," she swept forward to kiss my cheek, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. "You look wonderful. We're so happy you're here." "This place is incredible," I managed, still trying to process the sheer opulence. "How did you—" "Real estate," Rick interrupted, his laugh a little too loud, a little too bright. "Caught the market at exactly the right time. Lucky timing, mostly." Something about his tone felt off, but Emma was already taking my arm with a practiced grace. "Come, let's get you settled. Maria, could you take Mr. Miller's coat?" I handed over my jacket, my best one, which suddenly felt shabby and worn. Maria accepted it with another of those kind but troubled smiles before disappearing. "I brought this," I said, offering the bottle of whiskey. "Thought we could share a drink." Rick's face lit up as he examined the label. "Dad, this is fantastic. You shouldn't have, but I'm glad you did." He clapped my shoulder with an enthusiasm that felt slightly forced. "Emma's been cooking all afternoon. She remembered how much you love pot roast." How did she remember? We'd shared maybe 3 meals together in 5 years, and I couldn't recall pot roast ever being a topic of conversation. But her smile was so warm, so welcoming, that I pushed the thought aside. "Family takes care of family," she replied smoothly, linking her arm through mine. "That's what matters most." Rick led us into a dining room straight out of a period drama. A massive mahogany table was set for four with gleaming china and silver. Multiple forks and knives were arranged with military precision beside each plate. "Only the best for family reunions, right, Dad?" Rick beamed as he pulled out the chair at the head of the table for me. Emma settled gracefully to my left, while Rick took the seat to my right. The arrangement felt deliberate, positioning them to flank me, to guide the conversation. "Let's start with your whiskey," Rick announced, already opening the bottle I'd brought. The amber liquid caught the light as he poured generous portions into heavy crystal tumblers. He filled my glass higher than I would have poured for myself. "To family," Emma said, raising her wine glass. "To forgiveness and fresh starts." "To Margaret," Rick added, his voice catching slightly. "She would have wanted us together like this." The whiskey burned sweetly as we drank. Almost immediately, a pleasant warmth spread through my chest, more potent than I expected. The conversation started easily. They asked about the restaurants, and I found myself speaking more freely than I had in years. 7 locations now," Rick said, a note of admiration in his voice. "That's impressive by any standard." He'd been keeping track, even during our silence. A warmth expanded in my chest. Maybe he had cared more than I'd realized. He refilled my glass before I even noticed it was empty. Maria served a rich lobster bisque. I noticed her hands trembled slightly as she placed the bowl in front of me. "Do you ever think about retirement, Jonathan?" Emma asked casually. "Slowing down a bit?" "The restaurants keep me busy," I said, taking another sip of whiskey. The room felt warm, comfortable. "It's what Margaret and I built together. Every location has her fingerprints on it." Rick and Emma exchanged a glance I pretended not to see. "But you can't work forever," Rick pressed gently. "Have you thought about succession planning? Legal arrangements for the future?" The question felt oddly specific, but the alcohol made everything seem harmless. A simple inquiry from a concerned son. The main course arrived, a pot roast that smelled exactly like Margaret's recipe. As we ate, Rick told vague stories about his real estate ventures, while Emma asked surprisingly detailed questions about my profit margins and property values. My head felt lighter than it should have after just 2 glasses. I was in the middle of a story about the opening of my newest restaurant in Queens, feeling the pleasant buzz of the whiskey and the warmth of what felt like a real family dinner. "Margaret would have been so proud," I was saying, reaching into my pocket for my phone to show them a picture. Just as my fingers closed around it, the phone vibrated against my palm. The vibration startled me mid-sentence. "Sorry," I mumbled, glancing at the screen. "Everything all right?" Rick asked, leaning forward with an excessive amount of concern. "Just an unfamiliar number," I said, shielding the screen with my hand out of pure instinct. The number was local, but the digits were completely foreign. It wasn't one of my managers. Then I saw the message. It appeared in stark, urgent capital letters. "Stand up and leave. Now. Say nothing to your son." My blood turned to ice. The elegant dining room suddenly felt like it was tilting, the crystal and silver blurring at the edges. I blinked, certain I'd misread it, that the whiskey was playing tricks on my eyes. I read it again. The words were the same, unchanged, unforgiving. Dad? Emma's voice seemed to come from a great distance. You look pale. Are you feeling all right? I forced my features into what I hoped was a normal expression, slipping the phone back into my pocket with a hand that trembled. Fine. Just rich food hitting me harder than I expected. But I wasn't fine. Someone knew where I was. Someone felt I was in danger. Danger from my own son. The whiskey glass in my hand felt slick. When had I become so dizzy? 2 glasses shouldn't affect me this strongly, not with a full meal. You sure you're okay? Rick studied my face with sharp attention. You went completely white there for a second. I'm sure, I lied. I just need to... Excuse me for a moment. The bathroom? Rick pointed toward the hallway. Second door on the left. We'll wait for you. Maria's bringing dessert. I stood carefully, testing my balance. The room swayed slightly, but I managed to walk in a straight line toward the hallway. The anonymous message burned in my mind. Second door on the left. But my feet didn't turn left. An instinct I couldn't explain, a cold dread coiling in my gut, pulled me straight ahead, toward a door that was slightly ajar at the end of the hall. The door led to Rick's home office. It was dark, save for the faint glow of a computer monitor. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a drum of warning. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of leather and my son's expensive cologne. On the large mahogany desk sat a leather briefcase, its clasps undone. My eyes, adjusting to the dim light, were drawn to a stack of papers peeking out from inside. The letterhead was instantly recognizable. It was from my company, my restaurants, my life's work. My hands shook as I reached for the documents. The words swam before my eyes, the whiskey making it hard to focus, but the meaning was brutally clear. Power of attorney, transfer of assets. My breath hitched. It was all there. A thick stack of legal documents prepared in advance. A complete and total transfer of every property, every business asset, every penny Margaret and I had ever earned. The only thing missing was the most important element, my signature. The pen lay right beside the papers, waiting. The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. The dizziness, the whiskey, the pot roast, the questions about succession planning. It was all a carefully orchestrated trap. My son was trying to drug me and steal everything from me. I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I tried to open the camera app. I needed proof. I needed a picture of these documents. Just as the screen lit up, I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were moving quickly toward the office. Panic seized me. There was no time. I shoved the papers haphazardly back into the briefcase, my only thought to get out of sight. My eyes darted around the room and found another door, a smaller one, partially hidden behind a bookshelf, a side exit to the hall. I slipped through it just as the main office door swung open. I flattened myself against the wall in the darkened hallway, holding my breath. I could see Rick's silhouette in the doorway. He flicked on the desk lamp. Where did I put it? He muttered to himself, his voice tight with frustration. He rummaged through the briefcase, the sound of rustling paper echoing in the silent house. I didn't wait to see what he was looking for. I moved silently, my polished shoes making no sound on the thick runner. I had the knowledge, the terrible, soul-crushing truth. But the proof was back in that office, in my son's hands. I was weaponless, armed only with a truth so monstrous no one would ever believe it. My only thought was to escape. I walked quickly, not toward the grand foyer, but in the opposite direction, toward the back of the house, where I guessed the kitchen was. The scent of coffee and roast confirmed it. I pushed through a swinging door and found myself in a kitchen that was larger than my entire first floor. Maria stood at an enormous sink, her back to me, washing crystal glasses with methodical precision. My footsteps must have been audible on the marble floor, but she didn't turn. She didn't acknowledge my presence in any way, as if I were a ghost. The kitchen's back door stood just beyond her, a dark rectangle promising freedom and fresh air. A space to think, away from the watchful, predatory eyes of my son and his wife. I moved quietly past Maria, expecting her to turn, to call out, to alert them. She never looked up, but I saw her shoulders tense as I passed. It wasn't ignorance, it was permission. The door opened silently onto a manicured lawn. Motion sensors lit my path across the perfectly trimmed grass toward a gate in the property's back fence. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, its mysterious warning now a confirmed prophecy of betrayal. I broke into a stumbling run, my dress shoes slipping on the dewy grass. The gate opened onto a quiet residential street lined with silent, imposing mansions. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling so badly it took 3 attempts to open the ride-sharing app. I requested a pickup 1 block away, a safe distance from Rick's house. 5 minutes until arrival. 5 minutes to process the wreckage of my family. The Uber's headlights appeared at the end of the block like a lifeline. I climbed into the back seat, gave the driver my Brooklyn address, and then, with a deep breath, dialed the number that had sent the warning. It rang twice before a voice answered. It was the housekeeper, Maria. "I hoped you would call this number," she said, her voice careful and deliberately neutral. "Who is this? Why did you warn me?" My voice was rough, ragged. "I cannot reveal myself," she said, and I realized she didn't know I recognized her voice. But you were in danger tonight." "Danger? I saw the papers. The power of attorney. He was trying to rob me." There was a pause. "It is worse than that, sir. Your son, he owes a great deal of money. $2.3 million to people who break bones when a payment is late." The Uber driver glanced at me in his rearview mirror. "That's impossible," I breathed. "He has this house, the cars." "He borrowed against everything to fund gambling debts," she said, her voice flat, reciting facts. "Underground casinos, high-stakes poker. The house is a facade. The loan sharks gave him 2 weeks to pay. That deadline is in 11 days. Her words painted a desperate picture, but in her calculated telling, she omitted the most crucial detail. She didn't mention the drug. She didn't mention the poison. She feared, perhaps rightly, that a truth so monstrous would sound like a delusion, that it would scare me into paralysis instead of action. "They were going to pressure you," she continued, her voice gaining urgency. "I heard them talking. Those men were here earlier. They told Mr. Rick they wanted their money, and they didn't care how he got it. The papers, they were going to get you to sign them tonight to cover his debt." Her partial truth landed exactly as she intended. The cold dread of betrayal was replaced by a surge of misguided paternal instinct. The dizziness I felt, I rationalized it away as shock, as stress. My son wasn't a monster trying to poison me. He was a desperate man, cornered by criminals, making a terrible choice to save his own life. The narrative shifted in my head. Rick was no longer the villain. He was a victim. And I was his father. My job was to protect him. I looked out the window. The expensive Montclair neighborhoods blurred past, their perfect lawns hiding imperfect secrets. This wasn't over. I couldn't just run back to Brooklyn and leave my son to be torn apart by loan sharks. I leaned forward. "Driver." The man glanced in the mirror again. "Yeah, pal?" "Turn around. We're going back." He hesitated. "You sure about that? You seemed pretty keen on leaving a minute ago." My resolve hardened. My new plan was simple. Confront Rick, get him to confess everything about the debt, and then we would go to the police together. I would save him from himself, from the consequences of his own terrible choices. It was what Margaret would have wanted. "My son is in trouble," I said, my voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "I'm going to get him out." The return journey felt completely different. The streetlights no longer illuminated a path of escape, but a path of confrontation. Each mile brought me closer to the son I had raised, the family I had trusted, the mess I now felt obligated to clean up. Walking up the curved driveway a second time felt like approaching a gallows. The mansion's perfect exterior seemed like a lie, concealing a desperate, rotten core. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorbell. This time I knew what I was walking into, or so I thought. The chimes echoed through the house. Footsteps approached quickly, urgently. Rick yanked the door open, his face a mask of warring relief and suspicion. "Dad, where have you been?" His smile was painted on, brittle and thin. "We were getting worried sick." "Sorry, son." I forced an apologetic tone. "I just needed some fresh air. Felt dizzy after all that rich food." "Dizzy?" His eyes sharpened. "You were gone for almost half an hour. Emma thought something terrible had happened." Emma appeared behind him, her designer dress wrinkled from what looked like nervous pacing. Her perfect hostess mask slipped for a second, revealing the raw panic underneath before she composed herself. "Jonathan, you gave us such a scare," she said, reaching for my arm with fingers that trembled slightly. "Are you feeling better now?" "Much better, thank you," I said, allowing her to guide me back inside. Her grip was too tight. "Just needed to clear my head." "Perhaps you had too much wine with dinner," she suggested, her laugh sounding like shattering glass. "Actually, I think I'd like to sit down again," I said, moving deliberately back toward the dining room. "If that's all right." Rick and Emma exchanged a look, a flash of communication I was meant to miss. They were improvising, their well-rehearsed plan having gone off the rails. "Of course, Dad," Rick said. "Whatever you need." The dining room had been hastily reorganized. The crystal glasses had been cleared, but the atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension. I settled back into my chair at the head of the table, and they flanked me just as they had before. "So, Dad," Rick began, drumming his fingers on the table, "feeling completely recovered? No more dizziness or confusion?" The question was loaded. He was checking to see if I remembered anything. "Clear as a bell, son," I replied evenly. That fresh air worked wonders. A new resolve hardened in Rick's eyes. He clearly believed he had a second chance to see his plan through. He stood suddenly and moved to the liquor cabinet. "Dad, let's have one more toast before the evening ends." His hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he poured whiskey into 2 fresh crystal tumblers. I watched him. I saw his back was turned to me and Emma. I saw him reach into his jacket pocket. I saw him sprinkle a fine white powder into one of the glasses. It was a larger amount this time, a desperate, reckless dose. In that moment, Maria's carefully constructed lie crumbled into dust. The false lead evaporated, replaced by a horrifying, undeniable truth. This wasn't a desperate attempt to secure a loan. This wasn't about pressure. This was cold, calculated, and malicious. He was trying to poison his own father. He turned around, the two glasses in his hands, a charming smile fixed on his face. The glass intended for me was cloudy, the amber liquid swirling with a fine sediment that caught the light. The other was crystal clear. The depth of his betrayal was absolute, and my misguided attempt to save him had just walked me right back into the trap. Rick set my glass down in front of me, the poisoned one, ensuring I could see the generous portion he'd poured. "A toast," he said, his voice overly bright. "To second chances." I had to buy time. The police I had called from the Uber on the way back were on their way, but they weren't here yet. My mind raced. I needed to stall. "You know," I began casually, not touching the glass, "I want to tell you about the day you were born, Rick." His shoulders tensed. "Yeah, Dad, that's sweet, but maybe we should toast first. This whiskey is too good to let it get warm." "This is important, son," I said, settling back in my chair, folding my hands peacefully on the table. "Your mother was in labor for 14 hours. Longest day of my life." "Jonathan, the whiskey will lose its flavor," Emma urged, her smile growing strained. "Can't we drink and listen at the same time?" "Patience, dear," I said, my eyes fixed on Rick's. "Some stories can't be rushed." I lifted my glass as if to examine the whiskey's color, swirling the contents gently. The foreign particles danced in the amber liquid like a snow globe of death. Margaret was convinced something was wrong because the labor was taking so long. But she always had instincts about these things. She always knew when something wasn't quite right. Rick's eye began to twitch. "Dad, you've been talking for 10 minutes. The whiskey really is getting warm." "Time flies when you're sharing memories," I said, gesturing expansively with my glass, carefully avoiding drinking from it. Emma stood abruptly and moved behind my chair, her hands settling on my shoulders. "Jonathan, you're such a wonderful storyteller," she cooed, her fingers pressing down with increasing insistence. "Why don't we toast to Rick's birth? Then you can continue." I could feel her desperation through her touch. The plan was falling apart, and they knew it. "The thing about stubbornness," I mused, still holding my untouched glass, "is that it can be a virtue or a vice. Margaret always worried about which way you'd choose." The room fell silent. Rick and Emma stared at me, their frustration boiling over. I think," I said slowly, "Margaret would be heartbroken to see what choices you've made." Rick's face went white. "What do you mean by that?" Before I could answer, 3 sharp, authoritative knocks echoed from the front door. A voice, amplified and unmistakable, boomed through the house. "Police! Open the door!" Rick's glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The color drained from his face, leaving it the color of old parchment. Emma let out a small, strangled gasp and took a step back from my chair, her hands flying to her mouth. The perfectly constructed illusion of their lives shattered in an instant. The dining room was plunged into a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of the front door being forced open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the foyer, growing closer. 2 uniformed officers and a detective in a rumpled suit appeared in the doorway, their expressions grim and professional. "I am Richard Miller?" the detective asked, his eyes scanning the scene, the shattered glass, the panicked faces, the untouched whiskey in my hand. Rick seemed unable to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The detective's gaze settled on him, I think you'd better come with us. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the silent dining room like a judge's gavel. A senior officer stepped forward. Richard Miller, you're under arrest for attempted poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse. This is insane. Rick's voice cracked. This is a misunderstanding. My father is confused. He turned to me, his eyes pleading. Dad, please. Emma's composure finally broke. Tell them this is all some terrible mistake, she shrieked. I stood slowly, the poisoned whiskey still in my hand. The sediment swirled, a testament to their guilt. There's no mistake, I said, my voice steady. I held the glass out to the detective. Stikatsenim. This glass contains a drug. My son added it to make me sign business transfer documents. A junior officer carefully took the glass with a gloved hand, holding it up to the chandelier light. The foreign particles were clearly visible. Attempted poisoning carries an 8 to 12-year minimum sentence, the senior officer informed Rick as the handcuffs were secured. Rick's knees buckled. 12 years. But the loan sharks, they'll kill me if I don't pay in 11 days. Rick, shut up! Emma hissed. But it was too late. You had choices, I said quietly. You chose gambling over family. You chose crime over honest work. And you chose to poison your own father rather than face the consequences of your actions. The junior officer turned to Emma. Emma Miller, you're also under arrest as a co-conspirator. No, she clawed at the table. I didn't plan anything. Rick forced me. I'm a victim too. As they were led away, Rick turned back one last time. Dad, how could you do this to your own family? Mom would be heartbroken. Your mother valued honesty above everything, I answered firmly. She would never forgive what you tried to do tonight. At the Montclair police station, the reality of the night's events began to sink in. I sat with Detective Harrison, a tired-looking man with kind eyes, giving my formal statement. Through a reinforced glass window, I could see Rick and Emma being processed in separate rooms. Mr. Miller, Harrison said, setting down a cup of lukewarm coffee. Walk me through this again. When you went back to the house, you knew he was going to try again? I didn't know about the poison then, I explained. The anonymous tip I received was incomplete. I thought it was just about financial pressure, that he was being threatened by loan sharks. I went back to try and help him. And that's when you saw him put the powder in the glass? Yes, with my own eyes. He thought I was still dizzy, that I wouldn't notice. Harrison nodded slowly, making a note. My officers are executing a search warrant at the residence now. You mentioned seeing legal documents in his office earlier. A full power of attorney and a complete transfer of all business assets, I confirmed. They were in a briefcase on his desk. He almost caught me with them. Just then, Harrison's phone buzzed. He listened for a moment, his expression hardening. Understood. He hung up and looked at me. My team just found them. A full set of documents, just as you described, hidden in a floor safe in the office closet. Your son's fingerprints are all over them. The lost advantage was regained, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The hours crawled by. From the interview room, I could hear Emma's hysterical sobs echoing down the hall. It was all Rick's fault, she wailed to the officers. I just went along because I was scared. Detective Harrison raised an eyebrow. Fear doesn't typically excuse conspiracy, ma'am. He turned back to me. With the documents, the confession about the loan sharks, and the physical evidence from the glass, the case is airtight. Rick's looking at 15 to 20 years, Emma might get less if she cooperates, but she's still facing serious time. The numbers felt unreal. My son, my only child, would spend his 40s and 50s in a prison cell. Later, as an officer was preparing to escort me out, I saw Rick through the holding cell window. He was slumped on a narrow bench, his head in his hands. He looked up and saw me, his eyes lighting up with a desperate, familiar hope. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the station. "Please, I'll pay it all back. I'll go to treatment. I'll change." It was the same promise he'd made a year ago, the same manipulation. I looked at him, not with hatred, but with a profound and bottomless sadness. I just shook my head slowly and turned away. In the station lobby, as an officer waited to drive me back to Brooklyn, I pulled out my phone. I stared at the number that had saved my life. "Actually," I told the officer, "I need to make one call first." I dialed the number. She answered on the second ring. "This is Maria Gonzalez." Her voice was no longer disguised, but warm with genuine concern. "Maria," I said, relief flooding through me. "It's Jonathan Miller. You were right there the whole time. You saw everything and still found the courage to save me." "I couldn't let them hurt you," she said simply. "You treated me with kindness. You looked at me when you spoke to me. They treated me like furniture." Sitting in that sterile police station lobby, I started to cry for the first time since Margaret's funeral. Not from pain, but from overwhelming gratitude for this woman's quiet, powerful moral courage. "How did you know everything?" I asked. "The details about the documents." 3 days ago, I was cleaning Mr. Rick's office when I heard them planning," she explained. "They spoke as if I wasn't human, like I couldn't understand English. They discussed the drug, how much to use, where to hide the papers. Miss Emma researched your favorite foods, your routines, everything. You risked everything to warn a stranger." "Not a stranger," she said softly. "A good man who reminded me of my own father." An idea, clear and certain, formed in my mind. "Maria, I need to ask you something. Do you have another job lined up?" "No, sir. After tonight, I doubt I'll get good references from the Millers." "I own 7 restaurants," I said. "I need a manager for my newest location, someone I can trust completely. Someone with your character and judgment." There was a silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of a choked sob. "Mr. Miller, you don't have to do that." "This isn't charity," I said firmly. "I need people who do the right thing when no one's watching. You proved tonight that you're exactly that person. The job is yours if you want it." The ride back to Brooklyn passed in comfortable silence. The familiar streets welcomed me home. Inside my modest house, the photos still covered the refrigerator door. Rick as a boy, Emma at their wedding, Margaret smiling from a time before the world turned sour. I carefully took down Rick's photo. I didn't tear it up. I placed it in a kitchen drawer. Some memories deserve to be preserved, but not displayed. Emma's wedding picture followed it into the darkness. Margaret's photo remained, her smile seeming to approve of the night's hard choices. On the wall calendar, in the space for next Monday, I wrote, "Maria, 10 hours a.m., Crown Heights." Below that, I wrote, "New beginning." My phone buzzed with a final text from Detective Harrison. "Both suspects formally charged. Trials scheduled for August. Your testimony will be crucial." I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, a profound exhaustion settling over me. But for the first time in a year, I knew I would sleep peacefully. In my bedroom, Margaret's perfume still sat on the dresser, a silent reminder that love sometimes means protecting people from harm. even when that harm comes from your own family, especially when it comes from family. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.